In the 17th century, the western Deccan plateau was not the obvious birthplace of a subcontinental power. It was a rugged region of hills, forts, local warrior lineages, farming communities, and competing sultanates. Yet from this landscape emerged the Marathas, a Marathi-speaking warrior and administrative elite who would eventually challenge some of the strongest powers in India. Their rise did not begin as a conventional imperial project. It began as resistance, local consolidation, and the promise of self-rule. The Maratha story matters because it shows how power in early modern India was not simply inherited by old dynasties. It could be built through mobility, fort networks, taxation, military entrepreneurship, and political timing. What started as a regional movement under Shivaji became, within a century, a force capable of influencing Mughal politics, expanding deep into northern and central India, and forcing the British East India Company into a long struggle for dominance. The central figure at the beginning of this story is Shivaji. He rose in the 17th century against the Bijapur Sultanate and the Mughal Empire, two major powers that shaped politics across the Deccan. Shivaji's project was framed around Hindavi Swarajya, often understood as self-rule of Hindus, but its practical meaning was also political autonomy, control over forts, revenue, land, and military decision-making without dependence on distant imperial courts. His strength came from combining local knowledge with disciplined administration. Hill forts gave him defensive depth. Fast-moving cavalry allowed him to raid, pressure, and withdraw before larger armies could respond. His court developed systems for governance, revenue collection, and command. Shivaji's achievement was not merely that he fought empires. It was that he created a functioning Maratha kingdom that could survive beyond a single rebellion. The Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb played an unintended role in strengthening Maratha resistance. His long Deccan campaigns consumed enormous amounts of money, manpower, and attention. His religious policies also alienated many non-Muslim groups, creating wider resentment and weakening the moral authority of Mughal rule among important sections of society. The Marathas turned this imperial overextension into opportunity. They did not need to defeat the Mughals in one decisive campaign. They could exhaust them through repeated pressure, local uprisings, and attacks on supply and revenue networks. Aurangzeb's armies were vast, but they were operating far from the imperial heartland and against enemies who understood the terrain. By the time Aurangzeb died in 1707, the Mughal Empire had spent decades trying to suppress the Marathas, yet the movement remained alive and increasingly dangerous. After Aurangzeb's death, the balance of power began to shift. Shivaji's grandson Shahu became an important figure in reviving Maratha authority. Under Shahu, the office of the Peshwa, originally a prime ministerial role, grew dramatically in importance. The most famous early architect of this transformation was Peshwa Bajirao I, a brilliant military leader who helped turn Maratha power from a regional force into an expanding imperial system. Bajirao understood that the Mughal Empire was no longer the same centralized machine it had once been. Its authority remained prestigious, but its practical control was weakening. The Marathas could recognize the Mughal emperor as a nominal suzerain while controlling real politics on the ground. This dual arrangement was common in 18th-century India. Symbolic legitimacy could remain with one ruler, while actual power belonged elsewhere. Under Bajirao I and his successors, the Maratha state expanded rapidly. This expansion was not always a neat process of direct annexation. The Marathas built influence through tribute, military presence, revenue rights, and alliances. Their cavalry could move quickly across large distances, and their commanders became deeply involved in the politics of northern and central India. After the Battle of Bhopal in 1737, Maratha influence reached from Maharashtra in the south toward Gwalior in the north and toward Orissa in the east. At its stable height, the Confederacy influenced roughly a third of the Indian subcontinent. The key point is that Maratha power was not concentrated only in Pune. It spread through networks of commanders and ruling families who operated with increasing autonomy while still acknowledging the wider Maratha political order. This is why the Maratha Empire is often also called the Maratha Confederacy. Unlike a tightly centralized empire ruled entirely from one capital, it developed into a structure where the Peshwa at Pune, modern Pune, held overall leadership, but several major Maratha houses controlled their own regions. The Scindia family became powerful in northern and central India. The Holkars were based in Indore. The Gaikwads ruled from Baroda. The Bhosles were based in Nagpur. These houses were not minor governors in the simple sense. They had armies, ambitions, and regional interests. They accepted the broad framework of Maratha supremacy, but as time passed, they became more independent. This confederate structure gave the Marathas flexibility and reach, but it also created a long-term problem. Unity was difficult when each leading house had its own priorities. The Marathas' relationship with the Mughal emperor reveals the complexity of Indian politics in this period. From the time of Shahu I, the Marathas recognized the Mughal emperor as their nominal suzerain, much as several other Indian powers did. But this did not mean the Mughals were in command. In practice, between the late 1730s and the early 19th century, Maratha power heavily shaped Mughal politics. The emperor's name still carried prestige, legal weight, and symbolic legitimacy. Yet the ability to collect revenue, move armies, appoint allies, and pressure rivals increasingly belonged to regional powers such as the Marathas. This separation between formal authority and practical power is essential to understanding the 18th century. India was not simply declining after the Mughals, it was being reorganized by new military fiscal states competing for control. The great shock to Maratha expansion came in 1761 at the Third Battle of Panipat. The Marathas faced the Durrani Empire under Ahmad Shah Durrani, and the result was a devastating defeat. Panipat did not permanently destroy the Marathas, but it shattered the momentum of their northern expansion and cost them experienced soldiers, commanders, and prestige. The battle exposed the risks of operating far from their core territories, especially when supply lines, alliances, and local support were fragile. It also showed that Maratha power, impressive as it was, still depended on coordination among many leaders. A confederacy could expand quickly, but in a major crisis, fragmented decision-making could become dangerous. Panipat became a turning point not because everything ended there, but because it forced the Marathas to rebuild after an enormous strategic and psychological blow. Remarkably, the Marathas recovered much of what they had lost within a decade. Under Peshwa Mathvarov I, Maratha authority revived, territories were regained, and confidence returned. Mathvarov's leadership is important because it proves that Panipat was not a final collapse. The Maratha system still had deep resources, experienced administrators, and ambitious military houses. Yet Mathvarov's death created another turning point. His authority had helped hold the Confederacy together, and without it, the Peshwa's effective control over the major Maratha chiefs weakened. The great houses continued to matter, but they increasingly acted according to their own regional calculations. The Maratha Confederacy could still be formidable, but its internal balance had changed. It was less a unified engine of expansion and more a collection of powerful states connected by shared identity, history, and contested leadership. By the late 18th century, the biggest external threat was no longer the Mughal Empire. It was the British East India Company. The company was not merely a trading organization by this point. It had armies, revenue systems, alliances, and a growing appetite for political control. The Marathas were among the few Indian powers strong enough to resist British expansion seriously. But their confederate structure made coordinated resistance difficult. Rivalries among the Peshwa, Holkar, Scindia, Bhosle, and Gaikwad interests created openings for British diplomacy. The company excelled at turning internal disputes into strategic advantage. It offered protection, negotiated treaties, intervened in succession struggles, and used one Indian power against another. Against a divided confederacy, British power did not always need immediate total conquest. It could first enter as an ally, protector, or arbitrator. The decisive opening came in 1802, when Peshwa Baji Rao II was defeated by the Holkar dynasty. Instead of resolving the conflict within the Maratha political world, he sought protection from the British East India Company. This decision had enormous consequences. By accepting British support, the Peshwa gave the company a legitimate path into Maratha affairs. What looked like a short-term survival strategy weakened the independence of the entire Confederacy. The British intervention helped trigger further conflict, including the Second and Third Anglo-Maratha Wars. These wars were not just military contests, they were struggles over who would define political order in India. The Marathas still possessed major armies and regional power, but the British had superior coordination, financial organization, and a growing network of allies and dependencies. By 1818, after the Second and Third Anglo-Maratha Wars, the Maratha Confederacy as a dominant power had been broken. Some Maratha houses survived as princely states under British supremacy, but the age of Maratha-led politics was over. The fall of the Marathas marked one of the final major steps in the British East India Company's rise over the Indian subcontinent. Yet the Maratha legacy cannot be reduced to defeat. They transformed the political landscape after the Mughals, proved that regional powers could build vast military and administrative systems, and shaped the 18th century more than many simplified histories admit. Their story is one of rebellion becoming monarchy, monarchy becoming confederacy, confederacy becoming empire, and empire finally being undone by internal rivalry and a new kind of colonial power. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.